Hello and welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me on set is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Hugely terrific.
A warm welcome to you all. Our Facebook followers are watching us live. Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every Tuesday. And today I want to start off by giving a special shout out to Ahadu Television in Addis Ababa that carries this program live. We look forward to engaging you on several occasions, and today, welcome to Shaka Extra Time. So Shaka, let's maybe start off in Sudan. The Sudan's military and protest leaders signed a constitutional declaration over the weekend that paves the way for civilian leadership in that country. Bring us up to speed.
We're talking, of course, about 3 years. We have to talk about elections, and I hope that these will actually be elections, not the type that Omar Bashir used to win, or supposedly used to win. I think that it is a positive step in the right direction. We just have to be patient and wait and see. And also, hopefully, the new lineup, the new authorities will be reflecting the real people that enormously contributed to the changes that we are seeing now in Khartoum. And by that I'm talking about Sudan, of course, like a lot of African countries, is a male-dominated society. But you know as well as I do that when it comes to this most recent revolution, as it were, the women clearly took the lead, and I hope that they will be reflected, because I haven't been pretty much seeing them in terms of optics when it comes to negotiations, signing, and what have you. But I hope they will be there.
You make a good point. From what I've seen, in fact, I haven't seen a lot of women being represented, and yet when the revolution started last December, to be exact, December 18th, there were a lot of women, young women, engaged in the protests. And as we speak, I haven't seen any women on the forefront, on the table.
The spirit of Kandaka. We have to see the spirit of Kandaka at work.
Right. So how significant is this constitutional declaration? What does it mean in simple terms for ordinary people?
Well, we really don't know, because let's face it, you can talk the talk, but people should be able to be judged on the basis of actually being able to walk the talk, so that people can indeed walk the walk. So we have to be a bit patient.
Of course, this document that just got signed over the weekend builds on another one that was signed a month earlier that sort of talks about how this power sharing arrangement is going to work out. Can you help maybe our viewers understand how this is going to play out?
Well, first of all, if I remember correctly, you are having about 11 members of the Sovereign Council, and it is pretty much going to be 5 from the military and 5 from the civilian. And then you have someone who obviously is going to be the person that is going to hold the things together, and it seems to me that that individual is going to be coming from some kind of retirement, a former, senior military officer and all that kind of stuff. And again, we really have to wait and see how things operate on the ground. But as far as the way the modalities are panning out, it pretty much looks like I said, a positive step, at least so far, in the right direction. And I hope that we are going to look at a Sudan that is going to be a society that embraces the rule of law, not rule by law.
Interesting. How would you respond to Hon Yusuf Farah? We already said that a youth should have representation in the government. And when an election is held, 90% of the elected members are elderly people. If not 95%, there is no youth representation. In particular case of Sudan, we don't see young people who really put their lives on the line being represented in this struggle or in this power sharing agreement.
I mean, seriously, if in fact a new dawn is going to happen in Khartoum, it is going to have to be inclusive. We're talking about women, definitely. We should also talk about the young people, because let's face it, whether you like it or not, you have going to have to deal with what is called the changing demographics. And the changing demographics essentially is a reflection of the almost really the era of young people, because they seem to form the majority of the population, given that they have access to some kind of social media platforms and all that kind of stuff. They seem to be part of a generation that is perhaps more exposed than other generations, before it. So I think whether one likes it or not, the future of the Sudan, just like the future of Africa, is in the hands of the changing demographics.
Speaking of the changing demographics, Ethiopia, where we have a new leader, Abiy Ahmed, who has played a significant role in this power sharing deal that we see in Sudan. A lot of people say that he is perhaps becoming the kingmaker, or the kind of leader that a lot of countries aspire to have, considering what role or what's the significance of Ethiopia in this whole Sudan power sharing agreement.
It is interesting that you characterize Abiy Ahmed just like you did, because I remember a couple of months back was pretty much referring to him as arguably a legitimate new breed of African leaders. And it looks like he's actually pretty much panning out, in fact, to fit that kind of billing. Because look at what he has done. So, for example, in the second most populous nation on the African continent, a country that has more than 105 million human beings. Look at the manner in which he was able to end the damn war, the stupid war, the state of suspicion and what have you between his country, Ethiopia, and neighboring Eritrea. You now have two neighboring countries pretty much living and behaving like their cousins, which they are. And then you can see his also influence in what we are talking about in the Sudan. He was the man, in fact, behind what is really happening right now. And even the Americans had to come in via Addis Ababa. And it looks like this is a man, first of all, remarkably exposed, remarkably well educated, a man also who has senior military credentials, a man that seems really to be an embodiment of social, economic, political justice for everybody. And that's what Africa needs.
Well, but there are also critics out there who say that he's not doing enough. He cannot actually bring about the kind of change we are looking at in Sudan. He still has a lot of challenges when it comes to governing Ethiopia, partly because power is not vested in him as the prime minister. Power is vested in other organs of government, but not him. So that what he's doing is just rhetoric, not substance.
Well, the last time I checked, it seems to be more than rhetoric. Because let's face it, whether you like him or you don't, there is a semblance of stability, peace and stability right now. There are some problems definitely, because let's face it, you know, when you talk about change, Paul, change is neither an incident nor an event. Change is a process. And so people have to give him and his colleagues the benefit of the doubt. And by that, it means they really have to be patient. There is no question, no doubt in my mind that this is a man that commands the vast majority of Ethiopian supporters behind him. Yes, are there some people that are opposed to the changes? Of course they are going to have to be there. And they are there. They are there. Some of them are in prison, like Bereket Simon, a man who used to be the spokesperson for the government, especially under Meles Zenawi. There are some others that don't feel that these changes reflect their interest. Their advantages, privileges, and what have you are under threat. And so they naturally have to sort of figure out how to protect them. And so we're talking about humanity. When you talk about human beings, there are a lot of human beings whose patriotism essentially is a reflection of their stomach. And yet, when you think about the African philosophical ideology of Ubuntu and what have you, which says that my security really is there because of your security, and your security is there because of mine. At the end of the day, people have to be honest, they have to be serious, they have to focus like a laser beam that peace and stability is in the interest of every single Ethiopian, not simply some elements of Ethiopians. And I think that, again, we need to be a little bit patient and hope that one of these days we'll have an Ethiopia that has benefited from some of the good policies and good intentions of Abiy Ahmed and his colleagues.
When you talk about peace and stability, there are some countries on the continent that have had a stellar record of peace and stability. But on the contrary, they also have the worst human rights record. For example, let's go to Jerome Ogwang. Mr. Shaka, please, what do Western power think about human rights violations in Africa, especially in my country, Uganda, where hundreds of innocent people are being kidnapped, tortured, and in some cases killed? Maybe I can tie that with the press freedom in Uganda. We have an academic by the names of Stella Nyanzi, who was convicted by court for harassing the person of the presidency or the president of the Republic of Uganda. Your thoughts?
So are you giving Uganda as an example of an African country that has enjoyed what you characterize as peace and stability simply because President Yoweri Museveni has been in power since 1986 with no interruption?
Well, when you talk to a lot of people, they say at least for the last couple of years, they're able to sleep and wake up without any disturbances. So if that's by that definition, yes.
My brother, peace and stability is not the absence of war, is not and should not be the absence of violence. It should be the presence, and I repeat, the presence of social, economic, political justice. If you have no justice, then you have no peace. You just talked about a lecturer at your alma mater, the prestigious Makerere University. She's a lecturer and researcher at MISA, the Makerere Institute of Social Research. I have to be very honest with you that she has, in the past, I think, been a little bit perhaps careless in terms of the language that she has really been using, vulgar type of language, very abusive of President Yoweri Museveni. You may not like him and what have you, but whether you like it or not, he occupies the office of the President of Uganda. So I think that he deserves some kind of respect, or at least the office, the institution deserves some kind of respect. But I think that a lot of people also feel that the sort of punishment she got was probably not a sort of punishment that is a reflection of the crime or the offense that she committed. I think that probably happened because you are not talking about a country which pretty much is a society that has embraced what you would call the rule of law. You're talking about a society that pretty much a lot of legal scholars and political analysts will tell you that it is pretty much a society that reflects rule by law. In every society, by the way, where you have this syndrome of strong men or strong women, but not strong institutions, you actually do have rule by law. It is just like a case in Europe, you know, centuries ago really, where you would have to look at some of these statements made, for example, by some emperors of France, talking about l'état c'est moi, I am the state, and the state is me. Where you have Bourguiba at one time, who was president of Tunisia, and he would say, I am the system, and the system is me. And so you have a situation where, yes, you have a constitution, and that this constitution, in fact, is supposed to be the roadmap for the freedoms and what have you of a country, and that people, in fact, are citizens. They are citizens in the sense that they owe their allegiance to the state, and therefore they have constitutional rights. But in fact, the reality is that these citizens have actually been transformed into subjects who have no constitutional rights, subjects who depend on privileges granted to them by the individual authorities who are in charge. And therefore, when you look at the idea of checks and balances, for example, where we'll talk about the executive and we'll talk about the legislature, which makes laws and all that kind of stuff, and we'll talk about the judiciary, we'll find that for the most part, you're talking about a society where the executive, headed by a president, is pretty much in control of these other branches of government. And therefore, you are not talking about a judiciary system, sincerely, that is independent, that is free, to do the kind of job that it is meant to do according to the Constitution. So in other words, someone has pretty much transformed the Constitution into what some would characterize as a personal manifesto.
But how about people who say that under the press freedom law that is in Uganda, that actually a person can can stand up and abuse the president or abuse anybody? He has that freedom. The Constitution guarantees that right to express yourself. But you also have somebody who agrees with you here, Nandilirwa, who says that no one has the right to abuse the person of the president, as a right of speech. I mean, I don't disagree with both of you, but there are people who say that, for example, Bobby Wine today was charged again for intending to annoy, alarm, and ridicule the president. He has not done it. They are quote unquote saying that he intends to annoy and abuse the president. So how do you balance the two?
How do you quantify intention?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Or
again, I just told you that you are dealing with a society that it pretty much is not a society of laws. It's not a society that is following what is called the rule of law. Because in order for a society to follow what is called the rule of law, that society must embrace democracy. We are talking about a country and countries which are democratically challenged here. And when they are democratically challenged, they tend to use what is considered to be rule by law, or in fact, personal, in other words, an individual. An individual, in fact, has the power, usurps the power, and is in control to the extent, as I said earlier, that people who are supposed to be citizens, meaning because they have constitutional rights, actually find themselves in an environment which is largely run on the basis of intimidation by security forces, by the police, by the military, and what have you, and also a situation where you do not really have the freedoms of speech.
Speaking of
freedoms of expression, the freedoms of assembly, and where, in fact, a citizen or an individual does not have a right to own an opinion that may be different from the ruling party or essentially the state.
Okay, Shaka, speaking of security, the security minister in Uganda was allegedly assaulted another female member of parliament, and it goes back even a couple of years where the same security minister drew a gun at a same member of parliament some time back, and it has caused all sorts of uproar between the members of parliament in Uganda. But from your take, and in fairness to the security minister, he said those allegations are not true. People are trying to maybe assassinate his character. But he also, in his own defense, said that after all, what these people are complaining about, he fought to bring about that change, that peace and stability that you referred to earlier.
You know, first of all, I think you are probably talking about General Ele Tumwine, the Ugandan Minister of Security. It is true, I have actually read that I think his case is under parliamentary investigation. So again, we have to be a little bit patient before we run to certain specific conclusions. I think we should wait for the outcome of those investigations, and then we can probably talk about it in a manner that in which we are very, very well informed. But if it is true, for example, that he actually drew a pistol against a fellow parliamentarian, if it is true that that parliamentarian also happens to be a female, really, that seems to be very un-African, and obviously very undemocratic. And a person like that, if in fact that particular individual was able to behave the way we have read, the way it is reported and what have you, surely that should be the last person to claim that he went anywhere to liberate Ugandans. In fact, it means what he did with his colleagues. And when you look at the manner in which sometimes they behave, it is apparent it is evident that they feel that they have a sense of entitlement, that they in fact went to Luwero, eventually were able to win the battle, seized the power, and that they feel very comfortable that they can actually do the kind of power they have, they can do with it anything, so long as it is a reflection of their interests, but not the interests of the vast majority of Ugandans, for that matter.
Shaka, what are you talking about tomorrow on Straight Talk Africa?
It is very interesting because tomorrow we are actually going to look at transitions. We are going to look at changes of governments. Normally, changes of governments in democratic societies, they are brought about through the ballot box. You have an election that is free, fair, transparent, verifiable, and credible. And whoever wins eventually takes the reins of power. But in Africa, increasingly, what we are seeing that changes of governments and transitions are actually coming either through uprisings, protests, or revolutions, as it were. Now the question is, in fact, are these paths justified in a situation where a country is democratically challenged? Are people justified to vote with their feet in order to change a government?
We have time for one quick question. The Mandela Washington Fellowship just wrapped up here in Washington, D.C. Over 700 young African leaders, or commonly known as the Yalis, who are here in town. We've had, over the last 4 years, we've had groups and groups of young African leaders coming to town. Your thoughts on this Mandela Washington Fellowship?
I think we have to give credit to a former U.S. President, Barack Obama, that you are talking about a great investment. When you see very far ahead, these are the young men and women who are going to assume leadership roles. A man like Obama, I remember we were together in the Ghanaian capital, Accra, in 2009, when he addressed the continent from the Ghanaian parliament, talking about how Africa does not need strong men, but what it does need are strong institutions. He was criticized a lot by a lot of democratically aspiring and lovers of democracy, that he should have been able to do something to those strong men, which he failed to do. You know, like in politics, they say when people are running for office, they do it in poetry. They promise heaven on earth. But when it comes to the business of governing, that one, they do it in prose. They deal with the reality. He found it out, and I think he's investing in the future.
On that note, thank you so much. I look forward to hosting you another edition of Shaka Extra Time. Until then, so long from Washington.
You're most welcome.